Now we turn back to the Israel-Hamas war with our guest, Ariel Aram, who is a professor and chair of the Government and International Affairs program at Virginia Tech. His most recent book is War and Conflict in the Middle East and North Africa, where he explores the causes for fighting in that part of the world. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to get started with where we are right now in the Israel-Hamas war. What's been happening this week?
On the military front, Israel is accelerating its ground assault and ramping up aerial and artillery attacks against Hamas strongholds in Gaza. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are continuing to launch rockets at Israeli cities. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is worsening by the hour. Israeli attacks have pulverized apartment buildings, hospitals, and other vital infrastructure. There are calls in Europe and the Islamic world for Israel to adopt a ceasefire. A small number of wounded Palestinians and those holding foreign passports are being allowed to leave Gaza for Egypt. The U.S. remains Israel's key ally and supporter, but has become noticeably wary of escalation and is putting pressure on Israel for restraint.
What sparked this round of violence?
This round of terrible violence began on October 7th when Hamas launched a surprise attack from Gaza into southern Israel. Hamas fighters targeted both Israeli military bases and civilian towns. They killed over 1,200 and took 200 hostages, including citizens of Israel, the U.S., Britain, France, Germany, Thailand, and elsewhere.
This is a very complicated issue, but if we were to boil it down, what is this conflict about and what are the origins?
There's a lot of mythology and self-serving narratives about the origins of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and who is responsible for it. Some people try to trace it back to the Bible or to the Quran. But framing this as an ancient conflict is unhelpful and I think historically inaccurate. About 100 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, Jewish and Arab Palestinian nationalist movements claimed the same territory as their homeland, including the holy sites at Jerusalem. The State of Israel was established in 1948 as a Jewish homeland. Palestinian efforts to establish a state of their own have failed thus far. There are many people in both the Jewish and Palestinian communities and key international supporters who believe that their homelands are indivisible and they can't be shared with others.
What is the goal for both the Israeli government and Hamas?
Part of what makes the conflict so dangerous is that neither side has a clear strategic objective, a stopping point at which they would stop fighting. Hamas's espoused doctrinal objective, embedded in its charter, is genocidal, to destroy Israel in the course of establishing an Islamic Palestinian state. Hamas claims that the October 7th attack was a response to Israel's capture of Hamas operatives and to Israel's attempts to lay claim to parts of Jerusalem. But its actions were heedless of the risk to civilians, both Israeli and Arabs. Moreover, it was not approved by the Palestinian Authority, which rules parts of the West Bank and enjoys the far greater international legitimacy. On the Israeli side, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu formed a unity government with his bitter political foes, but there's no unanimity on the agenda. At a minimum, Israel seeks to dismantle Hamas in Gaza and save the hostages. But there are factions within the Israeli government who want to launch a wider assault on Palestinians in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and to reckon with Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which could pull in others into the war.
And who are the other players in this war, and what are their interests?
This war is becoming widely regionalized and internationalized. The U.S. is Israel's most important ally and has provided military support and diplomatic support to Israel in its crucial time of need. On the other side, Hamas is backed by Iran, but is not really a direct proxy. Iran has a network of militant groups that it supports in opposition to Israel. There are also regional players, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, Turkey, and Egypt, that all have an interest in the conflict. China has been trying to identify itself as a negotiator and ambassador with little success. I think one of the big concerns is that outside players may be pulled into the conflict, making it taking what had been what is a relatively local conflict and turning it into a region-wide one.
We've seen protests and violence against Jews and Palestinians here in the United States and around the world. What's the potential for this conflict to spread?
There are significant Jewish and Palestinian diasporas across the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere in the world. And they all feel to have affective connections and emotional connections to their homeland. It's unfortunate that groups are trying to incite each other far from the conflict. I think that there is a real chance of escalation outside of the conflict within cities like New York, Los Angeles, London, Berlin, and that could have a spillover effect, making the overall conflict harder to resolve.
President Biden has stated the United States is still in support of a two-state solution. Do you think that that's possible?
The two-state solution remains, in my opinion, the best hope for a sustainable peace, but it's a very distant hope at the moment. The alternatives, though, are either war or a one-state solution, a unified state, and that seems even less likely.
What should we expect to see over the next weeks and months in this war? And do you think that there can be peace in this region?
Unfortunately, in this case, in the Israel-Palestinian conflict going on right now in Gaza, the violence is probably going to accelerate, at least for the next few weeks and maybe months, and it's not going to end anytime soon. I should stress, though, that the region as a whole has peace in different forms. There's a misconception or a stereotype of the Middle East as somewhere that's always on fire and always violent. And in fact, that's not the case. There are lots of areas of peace that forms in local communities, peace that forms in districts, in sub-districts and provinces, and sometimes peace between states. Just a few months ago, there were a lot of discussions about Israel's efforts to come to a peace treaties with Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan. Those are examples of peace. I think what we know, though, is that the peace of the Middle East is fragile and is maybe more fragile than in other regions and is more prone to being overturned. We have to be really careful and attentive to the role of spoilers who don't see peace as being in their interest.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Continue to follow Virginia News and Stories by subscribing to our VPM YouTube channel.